Hey, Ivan, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you for joining me. I'm Muckai Girish, co-founder and CEO of Rockfish Data, and we are helping enterprises overcome data bottlenecks. Data privacy and data fidelity have become really important, especially when it comes to the world of training AI models and making sure that we get the most out of data. That's the problem that we are addressing for enterprises. And it's just wonderful to talk to you, Ivan, and would love to know a bit more about your background and on Datasaur.
Certainly. So my name is Ivan. I'm the CEO and founder here at Datasaur. There's some overlap in what we do, or we target similar problems in the sense that Datasaur focuses on building and developing private LLMs. We've entered a stage now where a lot of people are using OpenAI at home and they want to be using it at work. We help organizations deploy solutions that are compliant, ensuring that they're not leaking sensitive corporate data to third parties like OpenAI or Anthropic.
Awesome. And this is not your first rodeo in entrepreneurship, right? You've been around the block.
That's correct. Yeah, I've worked at a variety of companies beforehand. My first startup was one that I sold to Yahoo in 2013. So I've been through this journey before. And then I also spent a couple of years working at Yahoo as well as Apple prior to starting Datasaur.
Wonderful. And we both have the same vision. We want enterprises to obviously make headway in AI and and machine learning in all aspects. However, data privacy has become a big issue, as you mentioned as well, and so we both are aligned in that. Wanted to ask you, what aspects of privacy do you see are most important, front, right, and center for enterprises these days? These are our customers.
Yeah, you know what? I see this as highly reminiscent of the movement when iPhones were first introduced 15 years ago. It was something that was very popular amongst employees. They wanted to bring this to work, but the organization security teams weren't quite sure how to handle it, so they had to adopt it very quickly. So similarly here, we see employees starting to use OpenAI for daily tasks at work, or maybe the executive is the one who's using something like this at home and wants to bring it to work, but knows that, that's they need to get the right privacy and security frameworks in place. Um, as we know now, LLMs are have already been trained on all the data available on the public web. But one source of data that's often missing is the proprietary internal data to an organization. So there's this kind of like intersection of companies wanting to bring this technology to work connected to their internal data, but also worrying about leaking that data to third parties that, should not have access.
Yeah, and obviously they are struggling with this, and they really haven't found a way to do this well before, right, Ivan? I mean, in terms of
That's right. I think we are still in the process of figuring out how to do this in a responsible manner.
yeah, absolutely, and that is a challenge that we also see, right, enterprises, because enterprises have the data, and they really want to be really careful in how they use it, and be very responsible, as you said. But the means of being able to do that has been challenging, and that's I'm glad you are addressing this, and we are addressing this, and I think together we can make a big difference. So
Mhm.
with that, Ivan, in your opinion, how should an enterprise be looking at it and addressing this aspect?
Yeah. So to talk about like how they should be addressing it, let's kind of look at the landscape of what the complexities are. These companies have constantly changing terms of service, right? In fact, a couple of weeks ago, it made headlines that OpenAI was getting a court order that they actually have to retain all temporary and deleted chats, right? And not everyone knows this. And so what happens there is, you think, I have friends and family who turn on temporary chat thinking it's just like incognito mode and they can just say whatever they want. But because of this court order, those chats have to be retained and could show up in court, right? And that's a really scary situation. Um, and so what these companies are doing is they're scrambling to kind of read the latest terms of service from OpenAI, from Azure's version of OpenAI, from Anthropic. On top of that, to make things even more complicated, we're seeing states, countries, and organizations like the EU roll out uh, new rules on a regular basis, and it's really hard to keep up with all of that. So back to your original question, how should we be addressing it? Well, there is a parallel trend that has been very powerful for privacy, which is the rise of open source models. There are these open source models. People may have heard of DeepSeek, made big news in January. Llama from Meta, OpenAI itself is rumored to be releasing one next month. And I think these open source models are just a half a step behind. Will have probably caught up to the latest state of the art by the end of the year. But what's really powerful about these models is that you can deploy them to your servers, to your environment, so that no data is ever leaving your environment, right? And that's incredibly powerful.
That's yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you're addressing that. And one thing that we do find, Ivan, is privacy oftentimes comes in the way of usability of data, right? Or they have at times they have conflicting sort of effects. So we
Mhm.
find that if you really want to share data, on one extreme, if you share all the data, then the privacy goes for a toss. And the opposite view is when you have make everything private, then the usability of the data goes down pretty rapidly, right? And of course, the approach that we have used is using synthetic data. You can find
Mhm.
a happy medium in getting the right trade-off between privacy and fidelity. But that applies if there is that ability to do that. But in the case of LLMs, obviously you don't want any data to be leaked, any data leakage issues. So I think what you are proposing is private LLM such that you just don't have this issue at all, right?
That's right. And so if you can build and deploy a private LLM, you can guarantee that the data is never leaving your servers. On top of that, you can use a variety of techniques, everything from prompt engineering to dynamic chunking in the RAG service to fine tuning to ensure that you're getting this model to actually do really well at the specific workflow you're looking for, right? So my um, one important takeaway here is that people don't need a general do-all model. It's actually better to have several narrow models that are really good at specific tasks, because at the enterprise level, we don't need it to summarize the latest Pixar movie. We need it to do two or three things really well, right? And so that's what we generally advise our clients to do. And what that allows is a really powerful model that actually can beat some of the proprietary models at that particular domain. But you can actually make it even cheaper, right? Because you've built it's a one-time cost to fine tune and train these models, but then afterwards, because you own it, because you're running it off your own hardware, it can be actually a cost saving method as well. And I do want to call out what Rockfish does with synthetic data can be very powerful here, right? Because because there are certain cases where you need to fine tune and you need a lot of data to provide as examples, but you just don't have enough doctor-patient conversations that you can actually use. So being able to generate synthetic data for use cases like that can be a very powerful shortcut to getting that solution to the level that you need.
Yeah, absolutely, Ivan, and very much agree with the point you made as well. That even we have done very purpose-built generative AI platforms, and that really outperform the very base the general models, right? When it comes to synthetic data generation, because these are again what you said exactly. They are less compute intensive, so they use less computation while producing better outcomes. Exactly to the point that you mentioned. Absolutely. I know you touched on this briefly. You touched on GDPR. But when it comes to different countries and even regions, right? Even like California, we are different from oftentimes from other states. Um, how privacy has become such an important thing, both from a regulatory standpoint as well as a consumer or an enterprise's adoption or outlook standpoint, right? In some places, people are willing to share all their data, but as long as they're getting something in return, right? Whereas in some other regions, they don't. That's not the right behavior. So when you kind of look at it from a behavior standpoint and the regulatory standpoint, how do you see, how should companies like us approach enterprises in these regions?
Yeah, so I think our conversation always starts with the client, right? The InfoSec team is going to be the best source for knowing what the parameters are, and we'll work backwards from those parameters. So, for example, there are some organizations that are actually comfortable. Maybe they've chosen and vetted Google Cloud Platform, and they're comfortable with using any models as long as it stays within their GCP servers, right? There are others, of course, who prefer AWS or Azure. And there are others still where none of these are acceptable. They actually need to procure those GPUs themselves. So we'll start with not only kind of the environmental constraints, but also budgetary, like what, how many GPUs do you have access to? That actually varies by region to region. Um, and so based on the kind of size of GPUs, based on your budgetary constraints, we might recommend different open source models as well. So we're finding it's a case by case basis, but people are starting to get accustomed to understanding what that there are more options beyond just the default OpenAI Anthropic enterprise licenses.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Do you, Ivan, do you see the folks worrying about privacy in these enterprises? Do they go all the way to the top, or is it only a subsection of people?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a conversation that should go all the way to the top, right? We do see CTOs and CEOs starting to wonder about what the options are, and they need to enforce that, like, hey, this is going to be our policy, our organizational policy when it comes to LLMs. So it's oftentimes a conversation between CEOs, and InfoSec teams.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it is something that everyone has to reckon with. And but at the same time, opportunities are phenomenal, right? I mean, we live in a very interesting time where AI and agentic AI and all the other approaches are getting rolled out, or at least being looked at to be rolled out pretty quickly. So it's phenomenal. And again, thank you for this conversation, and hope we can continue this and hone in on some more areas in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Ivan.